Let's go ahead and get started. We've been live for about 4 minutes. If more people want to join in later on, they can. The first thing that I wanted to show you guys was what I was looking at and what made me decide to talk about this tonight. So, all over Twitter right now, you can type in Bitcoin correlation, and people are talking nonstop about this issue of how the S&P 500 is correlated, or there is a direct correlation between Bitcoin and the S&P 500. And while if you take a look at some of these charts, you can look at that and see there is a direct correlation, I don't necessarily believe that that's always going to be the case. And the reason that I say that is several reasons. The first reason is that we are officially now in a recession here in the United States. And with that being said, a lot of investors are scared with their money, and when they see the slightest downtick in the market, decide to pull out all of their funds and go directly into cash. And whenever you do that, if you are somebody that likes to diversify in many different markets, then you have to go and pull out your funds in every single one of those markets. So if you want to diversify into gold, Bitcoin, stocks, bonds, anything like that, then you have to go to each one of those markets and extract those funds from those markets. So with that being said, I think what we've been seeing lately is people that are scared that the market is about to take a massive downturn have been pulling out all of their funds, regardless of what they are invested in. They're deciding to pull out those funds. On top of that, we also have hedge funds that are managed by certain entities, and the investors don't really have much of a say in where that hedge money is going. So essentially, when hedge fund managers think that the market is about to take a downturn, they'll pull out those funds as well, and you'll see it on a huge scale because some of these hedge funds have a lot of money to play with. So what we've been seeing, especially in the March timeframe right here, is investors taking their money out of all markets and going directly into cash. And it doesn't matter what market you take a look at, it would probably be similar to this chart that we're looking at. So this person did a really good job of displaying on the one-day chart the S&P 500 in blue and Bitcoin in the bar chart there. But I want to show you guys something. If you go on TradingView and take a look at the same exact chart, you'll see that it's not as correlated as you might think. And also, I want to mention that over the past couple of years, we've been talking nonstop about how capital investors and people with a lot of money to play with have been entering the cryptocurrency market. Ever since late 2017, whenever the market just shot up to 20K, I mean, you could make the argument that there was some manipulation there in the market, and I definitely think there was, but we saw a lot of people getting interested in this very speculative market. But since that time, slowly, I think there's been a lot of accumulation going on in capital investors' funds. And so if we were to scroll out and take a look at this chart, you would notice that the S&P 500 has taken a few dips, but has slowly risen to all-time highs, whereas Bitcoin has been trending down since about late 2017, early 2018. And you've seen like some of these huge rises and falls in the market. So there wasn't much correlation going on in this time frame. So what happened here? What caused this huge correlation to begin that we see right here in that March time frame? I think it goes back to what I was talking about before, where investors they see something happen in the market, they get scared and immediately want to go to cash. So what that means is these people that have invested large portfolios get rid of all of their assets that they have and immediately move to cash. And like I said before, you'd see probably in pretty much any market out there that there would be a correlation with this here. People mass exiting all markets and trying to get as much US dollars that they can. And the reason that that's so important to understand is because everybody wants to make the argument that Bitcoin is completely uncorrelated with the stock market, or at least that's been the case for the past 10 years. And now we're starting to see this small correlation here. But I encourage you not to look at this one small chart, because this has only been the past 6 months where we've seen a major correlation between the S&P 500 and Bitcoin, whereas if you look at the history of Bitcoin, there has been absolutely no correlation at all. And I think what is going to happen is eventually the stock market is going to tank. And I've talked about this in previous videos. I've talked about how this recession is going to negatively affect all of us worldwide. This is going to have an impact on all of us throughout the world. It's going to be a global epidemic that is going to cause all markets to eventually crash. And I don't say that lightly. I think that we haven't even seen how far this could go down. Everybody thought that the crash in March was exponential, but I think that we're on the verge of something a lot more drastic. And a lot of economists are saying the same thing because of what we're seeing with the Federal Reserve and how much they're having to step in right now just to keep the market afloat. They're taking every single precaution that they can, pulling out all of their tricks in the book to keep the market propped up, but it's all fake money. It's being printed out of thin air. And nobody is really calling us on our debt at this time. But if somebody were to call us on our debt that we owe to these other nations, then it would be chaos. I don't foresee anybody calling us on our debt here in the US, but I mean, there is always that potential. Another thing is the housing market. I talked a little bit about this before, is at all-time highs. And we saw this back in 2008 where housing costs rose exponentially and then cratered. Now, obviously, that had more to do with what was going on behind closed doors in the banking systems, but we're seeing a lot of these repeat offenses in the banking system that we saw back then. They're just labeling things differently now. But more on the stock market and Bitcoin is the fact that Bitcoin has a finite supply, meaning that there will only ever be 21 million of these minted into existence, whereas the stock market, companies can just issue more stocks if they want to. Now, obviously, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, let's issue some more stocks today. It's clearly not that simple, but essentially stocks can go out and issue more stocks. On top of that, they can issue bonds, which basically buy up their debt, meaning that people can go in and invest bonds on the corporate level and say, okay, I'll purchase your debt for you, but you are going to yield me a certain percentage of profit over the long haul. And so companies have that in their back pocket as well. And we're already starting to see the Federal Reserve step in to purchase some of those. And they're not really releasing who they're purchasing for. So there's a lot of shady business going on, and I think eventually the house of cards is going to crumble. And when that happens, the stock market is going to crater along with all other markets. And we might even see Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies go down during that time. But eventually, I think what we're going to see is people realize that Bitcoin, along with some other cryptocurrencies, are a hedge against these other markets. So we might see initially a sell-off if the stock market has a huge sell-off, because like I said before, these investors with a lot of money to play with just want to get their hands on as much cash as possible. Now, what's going to happen once they have that cash in hand? And keep in mind that a lot of these people that sell off are going to lose a lot of profits by doing so, because the market will most likely crash so quickly that people won't be able to sell in time to actually make profits on the stocks that they've purchased. Same thing will go with Bitcoin. People will have bought the top and then sell the bottom. We see it with every market cycle. But eventually, people are going to realize how finite Bitcoin is and decide to buy that as a hedge against the looming economy. Right now, the US economy is doing worse than it's ever done in the past nearly 100 years. Back whenever the Great Depression hit us, we had a extremely high unemployment rate, and we're seeing the same thing right now. So, I mean, we're already seeing history repeat itself in some ways. So how do we prepare for something like that? Well, you're starting to see a lot of people purchase up as much precious metals as possible. And I think that's a good hedge. Bitcoin and silver, or gold and silver, are always going to have their place as a hedge in the market. And I think it's a great hedge because those two metals have incredible utility. But I also think that Bitcoin is going to have a lot of utility as well eventually. Because if the US economy fails, then commerce around the globe is going to go down as well. And eventually people are going to want to look for the cheapest solutions possible for commerce. And cryptocurrencies are a very cheap way of trading throughout the world. And I think people will eventually realize that and harness that technology, that utility, and begin using it on a global scale. And when that happens, I think we're going to see a meteoric rise in the value of cryptocurrencies. Now, I could be wrong about everything that I've just mentioned, and don't consider any of this financial advice. I'm just letting you guys know what my plan is moving forward. I am going to be transferring a lot of my money into stable coins eventually, and sitting on the sidelines and waiting for that dip that I think is coming eventually, and buy up as much of these assets as I possibly can. Also, I plan on getting into rental properties once the housing market collapses as well. I think that that's coming with every other market that's out there. And once that does happen, my wife and I are going to begin looking for cheap rental properties that we can have on the side for that little bit of passive income. Along with that, I believe that we're going to be buying as much gold as we possibly can. And then, again, like I said before, buying that Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrency assets that I have in my portfolio, buying those once the market settles on a low price. Now, I want to stress that, again, I could be completely wrong about this, but I think this is the way it's going to play out in the future. I think that the correlation that we're seeing now between Bitcoin and the S&P 500 is not always going to be there. I think eventually it's going to decouple, and we're going to see Bitcoin rise at an exponential rate that the stock market just won't even be able to compete with, because people around the globe, I mean, we're already seeing it in countries in Africa and places like Venezuela that are harnessing the power of Bitcoin and realizing its utility and using it for its actual purpose. So it won't be long before the rest of the world catches on. A lot of people are holding Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a speculative asset, but eventually I think people are going to be using it for what it was designed for, and that's a peer-to-peer cash system, a peer-to-peer digital cash system. So with that being said, I think that's my take on what's happening, why we're seeing this correlation now, but what I expect to see later on in the future. And I can't tell you guys exactly when I think the market is going to crash. However, I think we will see some major moves in the market around the November timeframe because of the election that's coming up. So be sure to keep your eyes on that. Keep your eyes on the charts. Make sure you're looking at the right things, because a lot of people will sell you on this idea that the correlation is there. There's a heavy correlation between Bitcoin and the S&P 500. But if you take one scroll out and just look at the difference between Bitcoin and the S&P 500, you can see that that correlation has only been there very recently. So keep that in mind, guys, and do your own research moving forward. Don't listen to every single person that you hear on crypto Twitter or on YouTube. I mean, don't even listen to just what I'm saying. I encourage you guys to look at all different avenues out there, and based on what you read and what you see, make a decision, because it's your money, it's your investments that you have to worry about, and you need to make sure that you keep your family safe and be responsible with those funds. So that's going to be it for today's live stream. I appreciate you guys watching, and if you completely disagree with what I say, I want to know your reasoning. I want to know in the comments section below after this live stream is over, why you think that we're going to see that correlation moving forward. If you just completely disagree that we're going to eventually decouple, let me know why. I would love to see your data that you have on that. But that's going to be it for today's live stream, guys.